Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, day one of the NFL owners meetings is in the book, live from Phoenix, Arizona. We'll give you the news and the notes of the day. You'll hear from head coach Josh McDaniels, some extra sound that he gave us from Monday, plus your calls and texts will close out the show. It's all coming up on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, March 28th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won, and won, and won, and won, and won.
Welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show the first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it's available. And if you're following along on YouTube, we appreciate you, and that's because my guy Ari has held us down even when I'm on the road. You can catch up with him on Twitter at Ari Produces. Today's edition of the show is brought to you by FanDuel, FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Let's go ahead and get started. Monday recap from the owners' meetings in Phoenix, Arizona. First of all, what a great place. What a great location, right? Phoenix, Arizona is the spot, and there's not too many times that I'll say that the weather in Las Vegas is not as quite as nice as the weather that I'm going somewhere else. But being in Phoenix at the owners' meetings, the weather was beautiful. It was just great for day one. A lot of folks walking around with just their T-shirts or their polo shirt on, no sweaters, no jackets needed. I had my little my sweatshirt on early in the day and did not need it because, man, I'll tell you, it was such a nice day and a lot of gathering, a lot of folks from all NFL circles. Of course, all the teams are here represented. So just a really good showing for the first day. But the first day's biggest headlines came from not the Raiders, but the Ravens, Baltimore Ravens, that is, as Lamar Jackson put out a tweet about 3 minutes into the time that the coaches were meeting with the media. It was about 7:45 local time that the coaches from the AFC all sat down with the media. And, of course, I was sitting there with head coach Josh McDaniels, as a handful of us were, and John Harbaugh, the head coach of the Ravens, was sitting a few tables away from us, and all of a sudden a tweet about 3 minutes later from Lamar Jackson comes out saying that he had requested a trade from the Ravens on March 2nd, so early in the month, and of course it's later in the month now, and the news is out. And of course John Harbaugh, I mean, he wasn't caught off guard that Lamar asked for a trade. He obviously knew about that if it happened on March 2nd, but you could tell that it was a little bit different, little edge to the room once that came out and folks started talking about it, and of course everyone's looking down at their phone. All the reporters looking down at their phone were like, wait, hold on. Hold on, let's go ahead and ask Coach Harbaugh about that. And it's funny, he was walking by me when I was doing my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, Raider Nation Radio 920 on Monday afternoon. Myself and Vinny Bonsignore were tag teaming the show, and John Harbaugh literally walked by us with his phone in his hand, and I just out of nowhere just said, that's the man of the hour. And he just kind of looked back, laughed, and then also said, yeah, what text or tweet is coming up next, right? I better hold on. So he knows what's up. You know, he actually was a pretty good sport about it, but yeah, that was the big headline. That was the big news that broke out on Monday while the coaches were talking to the media. Of course, Lamar Jackson saying that he formally requested a trade on March 2nd. Now, does that mean that he's going to get moved? No, not at all. Does that mean that Baltimore is still in charge, in the driver's seat, and as far as I'm concerned? Absolutely. But what it does mean is that every team in the league now knows that, okay, knowing that Lamar had the non-exclusive franchise tag and any team could have called him and negotiated with him and gave up a couple first-round picks plus whatever contract, they agreed to, they could do that. Or, they could have took that contract back to Baltimore and they could have had 5 days to go ahead and match it. And obviously that still applies. But I just think it sends a message to the rest of the league that, hey, it might not necessarily be about money. I think I'm officially ready to get up out of there. Now, again, that does not mean that Baltimore has to grant his wish and trade him to anyone. But kind of the feeling around the owners' meetings on Monday was that, this is probably going to drag out a little bit longer than expected and maybe even drag out to the draft or even past the draft a little bit. And if it goes past the draft, then all of a sudden it gets real interesting because a team like Miami, I do believe, would really be all in on Lamar Jackson if they had the opportunity to go get him. And, of course, they couldn't give up the 2 first-round picks for the non-exclusive tag this year because they don't have a first-round pick in this year's draft coming up at the end of April. They had to forfeit that. So their first opportunity to have a first-round pick would be in 2024. So maybe the game changes once the draft passes. But I just think that all of a sudden sudden, every team in the league now knows that Lamar is ready to be out of there. So if there's some teams that need quarterbacks, and there's plenty of teams that need quarterback, we see them each and every year. And I'm not saying that this applies to the Raiders, but I do know that every team knows that Lamar Jackson is ready to get out of Baltimore. So we'll see how it changes. It was very interesting. It made for a very interesting day one of the NFL owners meetings here in Phoenix, Arizona. Also found out about DeAndre Carter. He visited with the Raiders. He was the guy that I talked about on Monday's show, and the news that broke on Friday that he was going to be visiting with the Raiders. Well, he officially visited on Monday with the Silver and Black. So, look, Dave Ziegler, head coach Josh McDaniels, Mark Davis, they're all here at the owners meeting. So he visited the organization. He visited the actual facility. There is no resolution to what came about that. I mentioned on Monday's show that he'd be a hell of an addition if they decided to bring him in and actually sign him to a contract. I wouldn't be mad at that at all. He's got plenty of special teams ability. And, of course, he's coming off a career high as far as being a wide receiver. And that just kind of adds some more to the mix as far as the Raiders offensively, what they can do. But we know the big elephant in the room is the defense, and that they've got to address the defense, and they've got to improve that. If not, they're going to try to be in too many shootouts, and it's very rare that they're going to win those kind of shootouts. So they've got to be able to play some defense, and they know that. That's why they have 12 draft picks that they're going to attempt to, turn this team around and really build up the defensive side of things. Not saying that that's the only position that they're going to pick in the draft, but it's obviously going to be a priority when it comes the end of April. Also, tight end Foster Moreau visited with the Raiders on Monday, and we all know that he's been diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, so he's stepping away from football. And I'm assuming, and I can ask whenever I get a chance to talk to maybe Mark Davis, the owner, or even GM Dave Ziegler, who we have not had a chance to talk to. Now, those guys talked to a handful of reporters. They talked to Vinny Bonsignore, to Sean Reed, talked to, I know, Dave Ziegler for sure. But formally, in front of all of us, Dave Ziegler has not been made available yet, and Mark Davis has not been made available yet. So hopefully that happens either today or Wednesday at the latest, but I can't guarantee that. And that would be disappointing if it doesn't happen, because as far as I'm concerned, it should happen, right? That's why we're here, is to see all three. We're not just here to see one, but Josh McDaniels actually met with us twice on Monday, and you'll hear the second part of him meeting with us coming up in segment number 2 of today's show. But I'm maybe thinking that Foster, maybe had to go and do a physical, and maybe he's, looking at some insurance, or I'm not too sure exactly what he's visiting the Raiders for, but I would love to get that answer. But we all know that, the hearts and our thoughts and prayers are out to Foster and his family, and I know the Raiders feel the same way. So I'll be interested to see exactly what came from that meeting, or it could have just been, visiting the team, and maybe they had to put it down as a actual visit in this free agency period. I'm not too sure, but I will get to the bottom of it and, of course, ask the question when given the opportunity. Final little note I have for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, kind of news and notes of the day. NFC coaches will be talking this morning at 7:45 local time. So going to try to get some time with Kyle Shanahan. Going to try to ask him a few questions about Jimmy G, just to get his thoughts on Jimmy. Potentially maybe talk to Dennis Allen, maybe talk to Brian Daboll about Darren Waller. But I really want to kind of focus on the players that are actually on the Raiders and that the Raiders have brought in. So definitely going to try to sit down with Kyle Shanahan for a few minutes at least and get some thoughts on Jimmy G and what the Raiders are getting in him, and what Kyle saw in him for the time that he was in San Francisco as they made the trade with the Patriots to go get him to be their long-term quarterback. And for a while he was there, right? And then injuries piled up, and obviously we know that they made the move, and now Jimmy G is in Las Vegas with the Raiders. So we'll get that information. We'll kind of talk to Coach Shanahan about that later on when he meets with us. So that's something to look forward to coming up a little bit later. But coming up in segment number 2, we're going to hear from head coach Josh McDaniels. He was in the media scrum, little round table, little breakfast action, and he talked to us for about 25, 30 minutes, and then we also went outside and talked to him again. And so the second time around was not something that we played on the radio. The second time around was not something that was streamed on Raiders.com. So that's what you'll hear coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. And we'll get right to that after we tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. And Man, I don't know how much March Madness you're watching. You should be watching it all, right? It's really good action, but right now is the best time. As the tournament is heating up and it's down to the Final Four, it is the best time to get in on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. They're giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, all you got to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. Then you can bet on everything. Money line, point spreads, who's going to be cutting down the nets, who's hitting the most threes. It is all good. They've got you covered. And it's all on an app that's safe, secure, and it's super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Time to jump into the second little media scrum that we had with head coach Josh McDaniels on Monday. Again, as I mentioned at the end of segment number 1, he talked to us in the breakfast roundtable setting. It was about 25 to 30 minutes. A lot of really good stuff. It was pretty loud in there, but it was some really good stuff. But to the Raiders' credit, they also made him available outside, and it was much more of an intimate setting. It was probably only about 5 or 6 of us, and we got some really good stuff in, and Vinny led us off and started talking about, matter of fact, asked the first question about Jalen Carter, and I thought this was a really good answer from head coach Josh McDaniels. So here's Josh McDaniels the second time around from the owners' meeting on Monday.
Josh is a player in this draft, Jalen Carter, who obviously has some baggage and is a little bit raw when it comes to Las Vegas, considering some of the recent history that's happened. How do you guys kind of assess all of that with what happened and what's happened here?
I think the big thing is to really do our work and know the truth of everything. I think there's a lot of things that could be said or speculated about, but you got to be careful about pinning on somebody. I think the reality for us is, our interest in the draft is always to make sure that we know how we feel about the character of the human being that we're talking about, not just a rumor. So we'll do everything we have to do to make sure that not only with Jalen, but any other player, we understand exactly what the truth is, what we're talking about, who we're getting if we select them. And there's still work to be done, I'd say, across the board in the draft on that. We still have, more than a month here to go. So, that'll all play itself out. But I don't rush to judgment on any of those things, because I think sometimes when you do that, you'll make a mistake.
If that process takes you to a good place where you feel, okay, this can work out, any hesitation at all to?
No. I mean, if you feel like, again, we want to draft players that will represent the Raiders both on and off the field the right way, and we have a certain standard that we believe in. So does Mr. Davis. He sets the bar, and so to me, once we've identified, and gone through our process, if we feel like the player, look, if we don't feel like we're safe to draft somebody, we'll just take them off the board, and not even include that as part of our process. So once the process is done, whoever's left, then they've all been approved, and we'll go forward with our process in the draft. But we still have some time here before that happens.
You referenced it inside there, Josh, about whether you would draft for need or best player available. Does that philosophy change at all depending upon where you're picking? Because last year you picked up the 3rd round. But now you got a top 7.
Yeah, I think for us, what we've talked about is honestly, like, if it's a tie, you know what I mean, then you might lean towards something that you're kind of a little bit more deficient in. I think you have to have something that's a tiebreaker. Yeah. And so for us, is if we say that, hey, this guy's graded here and this guy's graded here, but we don't have a lot here. Like, should we pass a player that's really talented at a different position? It's never been a really good philosophy to do that. Because if you add a really good football player, I mean, you're really not doing yourself, really that much harm. You know what I mean? If you need to do something later on in training camp or something to patch up a position for another year, then maybe you do that. But for us, we're going to try to evaluate the best players we can, and then when each pick comes up, try to make a good choice. And if there's a tie, maybe we, you said, maybe we lean something where we need it.
There's a little bit of reaction on social media the other day. These pro day things that kind of happens, like you and Dave specifically weren't at Will Levis's pro day. Is there anything?
We were with Will the night before.
Okay.
So there's just some scheduling things. We had our Bo was there, Champ was there. So, I mean, we can't be like this coming up this week too, there's a bunch of them on the same day. So it's just impossible to, really kind of logistically be everywhere. We were down there the night before. We're with Will, spend a lot of quality time with him, just trying to get to know these guys. Quarterback is such a position that is about fit, and it's not easy to determine that always. And so I think the relationship part of it is part of that. That's why we went down there quickly and did that. And then Bo and Champ were there at the workout. We get all the video, so we'll have all that too. And then we have the opportunity to Sean to bring him in for the 30 visits. So we'll get more time with these guys too. So it's not just quarterback. I know everybody's, these places we went have multiple players at multiple positions that I'd say we have a significant interest in. So the quarterback position gets the headlines, I know, but there's some other guys at these schools that are really quality players that we'd have an interest in.
You've worked with multiple different styles of quarterbacks, and there's multiple different styles of quarterbacks in this upcoming draft. Is there any kind of preference that you have, or is it just...
No, I think honestly, like, you look for a guy who's, I always thought you got to be able to think, throw, lead, learn. And, if you can do those four things, that's a great place to start. You know what I mean? Because in the National Football League, like, those are the guys that honestly, when you look at the last few games of our season every year, I mean, generally speaking, those guys are doing those things at a high level, and some of them at an elite level. And so, the other thing that I would say, Q, is that all these quarterbacks, I've been evaluating them for quite a while now, they're all at different stages of the development. And so, Anthony's at a different place than Bryce, and Bryce is a different place than Will, and Will, is a different place than Hendon Hooker, and Hendon Hooker's a different place than CJ, and CJ's a different place than Hayner and O'Connell. And I mean, there's a lot of different guys. Some of them have played more football, some of them have played less. And the more they play and the more they grow and the more they develop, you might reach their ceiling, and their ceiling might be a different place than they're at now. Most of them are. And so some of this is you got to look at what you see, the traits that they have, and then you got to project them into your system with your development and say, where's this guy going to be 3 years from now? Because you're not drafting a player and saying, okay, we're happy with where he's at today. We think we're going to be happy with where he's going to be at 3 years from now because we feel like he has a chance to really survive and be a good player.
When we were in New England and had Tom, and a lot of times you guys are drafted further down in the draft, how focused and zeroed in were you on quarterbacks compared to like now where there's probably a need and,
we did it really the same way. There might have been a couple times, Vinny, where we knew a guy was going to go like really high in the draft, and we knew we weren't going to be able to. But for me, I always looked at those guys anyway as an opportunity because we're probably going to play them at some point, and you never know if your work that you do now 4 years later comes back and you go, okay, we add this guy, and I did my research then and kind of I'm familiar with the player. So I've always gone through that process, and honestly, we drafted quite a few of them. I mean, from Castle to O'Connell to Hoyer to Mallett to Garoppolo to Brissett to Stidham. I mean, to Matt. I mean, we've always kind of been in the quarterback business, if you would, even though we didn't necessarily need a starter. You're looking for a solid backup, and like I said in there, I love the idea of having a young player eventually be your backup quarterback, where every year you're not looking for another veteran guy to put on a 1-year deal to keep being your backup quarterback over and over and over again, and so I think we've seen some dividends doing it that way and really like that process. And if we can find a guy that fits that description this year, I'd love to do it.
And how specifically then has signing Jimmy changed the philosophy, if at all, about taking a quarterback early in the draft?
If we feel like the guy is worth it, Paul, I think we would do it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just like I said, it doesn't say anything about anybody. Right. It's just he's a really good player at the most important position in football. And so is making your quarterback room stronger or a strength of your team a bad thing? In our opinion, it's not. You know what I mean? It's a good thing. So whether that happens or not, I don't know. There's a lot that could be done between now and then. But if a good player at that position falls, like that's what happened with Jimmy.
Yeah.
I mean, we took him in the second round, and and we had Tom, and it was like, okay, this guy's available, and it's like, holy cow, like let's get him. So I'd say at that position, whenever a player if you feel like he's worth it, it's worth taking him.
So you just listed a bunch of guys too. Is that your order of preference?
Say it again.
I
I listed them all out of order. So don't read anything into that. There's still, I would say, there's still some work to be done on that part of it.
Yeah.
But as Q said, there's very few of them that are the same.
Gotcha.
I mean, this class is really, I'd say it's pretty unique in that there's not many of them that resemble somebody else.
Right.
And so doing our work on them, and I think they're all on different stages of their development. So it's an interesting group.
You mentioned the players taking a leap in year 2 of your system. Do you see that being the case with Hunter Renfrow?
I would love to believe that, yes. And again, Hunter battled through the concussion, the oblique, so it wasn't I wouldn't say it was a clean year relative to him in terms of his health. So I think, just talked to him, maybe a couple weeks ago. I mean, it seems like he's healthy, seems like he's in a good place in terms of working out and being ready to go in terms of the off season. I just love for him to have an opportunity to be healthy and go through the whole off season and then into training camp, and feel good about going into the season health-wise and then trying to stay healthy and see what he can do. I mean, obviously he was a big reason I was excited about being here. I've had a long history of these kind of guys, that I've had a chance to work with, and was super excited and still am super excited about it.
Josh, last few years we've seen a couple quarterbacks that were more in the first round, more so off their physical traits, Josh Allen types, Trey Lance types, and there's another one this year that's probably going to go in the first round, and Anthony Richardson. When there's a player like that, how do you go when he only has a 1 year experience, for example?
Yeah.
How do you go about projecting what you think they are and what they could be at the next level?
Learn as much about them as you can. Really get to know the person in as many ways as we're able to. So meeting him, being at the pro day, having him in our building, talking to him at the combine, like that process has already started. And, this is a unique person now, in terms of his athletic skills and ability, what he's able to do. These are rare, as we saw at the combine. So you got to take a look at those things. And you also have to factor in what you think you want to have them do, if they're playing for you, And when we did Lamar a few years ago, the conversation was not going to be the same. At that time, I think we had Tom, and it would have been Tom and Lamar. And it's like, two guys aren't going to be doing, we're not asking Tom. We could ask Lamar to do some of the things that Tom, but we're not going to ask Tom to do what Lamar can do. You know what I mean? So there's some different conversations that need to be had about how you use a player too that has a really specific skill set and a very unique talent, and AR definitely has that.
We were talking about second-year guys. How about Matthew Butler and Neil Farrell? They didn't get a lot of burn in their rookie year. How much do they need to step up this year?
Yeah, we're excited. Both of them have already been there, on their own with our strength guys, which they're allowed to do, and just really trying to put in all the time and effort that they need to I'd say, start at a better place than they finished, which sometimes is a huge key for guys going from year 1 to year 2. But, invested, in the defensive line last year a little bit in the draft. And obviously, if those two guys can have a really good leap here into year 2, that would help us for sure.
Jermaine is listed as a guard tackle still.
Yep.
Is there still a possibility that he could play guard, and could there maybe play guard?
We talked to Jermaine as we were going through that process and bringing him back, and it's, one of the unique traits about Jermaine is he's like one of the few guys in the league that, right tackle, played left tackle, played right guard, all in games last year in the same season. And there's not that many players that you can say that about. And so Jermaine's versatility, his ability to play right and left, his ability mentally to be able to handle that because the calls are a little different on each side of the ball. That's a value, and so we'll see how it shakes out, Vinny. We don't ever go in there and, like you guys saw last year when you go into training camp and just put them in one spot and leave them there and never move them. Like, I don't really think that's a great way to go, because eventually, as we saw during the course of the season, we were going to need somebody at, Dylan went from guard to center. Dylan played on both sides of the center at guard. Jermaine played at tackle and guard, So there's a lot of moving parts that usually you have to, go through during the course of the season. And, preparing those guys for that early is better than trying to throw them in there at the last second and they've never really practiced it. So we'll use all the versatility we can with those guys, give them an opportunity to compete in there and see how it all shakes out.
So there you go. Some good stuff, I thought, from head coach Josh McDaniels, talking about Jalen Carter off top with Vinny. And he didn't rule him off the board. Didn't say that, no, that they're not a guy that he would consider. Matter of fact, said he would do a lot of they would do a lot of investigating, and they'd have to really be confident. And that's not just with Carter, but that was with everybody. So I thought that was the right answer. And, again, being a month out, from the draft still, they have plenty of time to do the groundwork and to do some real deep diving into the background of one Jalen Carter. And, again, that's the smart thing to do. But you also heard him say if everything checked out, they would have no problem drafting him. And I do think he'll be available at number 7, unless Seattle gets him at number 5, who I've kind of pegged as that one team. They're the one team, and I feel bad for doing this, but I've pegged them to take either Anthony Richardson or take Jalen Carter. Just that one team that would be comfortable taking either one of those guys and feeling like that's the right decision, especially since they have 2 first-round picks this upcoming draft. Also, Paul reiterated a question that I asked earlier in the breakfast setting about having Jimmy G. Does that make it a less of a priority to have to go and address the quarterback position at least early in the draft? And I think that Jimmy G kind of alleviates that. Eliminates that need to have to go get him immediately, right? I mean, they could find a quarterback. I believe Hendon Hooker is a guy that they're interested in, so maybe if he falls around 2, maybe the Raiders would jump on him there. I just gut feeling tells me that they're not going to take a quarterback at 7 or in their first pick. I just don't feel like that's going to happen. But, again, that's just my gut feeling. That's nothing that I've been told. But I thought that was some really good stuff from head coach Josh McDaniels. So hopefully we hear from Dave Ziegler, and hopefully we hear from Mark Davis before this trip is all wrapped up, because, again, this is the reason why we're here. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and text straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Before we get to that, though, I do want to talk about the Built Bar March Madness competition that's going on, and that's almost over, as March Madness is almost over. But you got to go to builtmarchmadness.com, to vote for your favorites. I've been voting for cookies and cream. I was rocking with UCLA, but we all know UCLA took an L, so there's that. I can't rock with them anymore because they've been done deal records. Gonzaga put them out, and then Gonzaga got put out, so they're no longer a part of this. But cookies and cream Built Bar is definitely available. So when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built, have the best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. And you know all the reasons why you got to try Built Bar. I tell you all the time, low in calories, low in sugar, high in protein, great taste, covered in chocolate. The puffs have the marshmallow, so if that's what you like, they got that too. They got something for everybody. So, I mean, it's really a no-brainer to go ahead and tap into that. But they are going to be good for you and going to be that snack that you're really looking for when you're trying to take that next step. So right now, BuiltMarchMadness.com is a website. Go there, vote for your favorite bar or puff, and pick up a box while you're there. Again, BuiltMarchMadness.com. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Calls and text straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. What is on your mind? What do you want to know from the owners' meetings? That is what it's all about. So let's go ahead and jump into the first call, coming from Raider Meatloaf, calling to give a little Raiders draft history based on something he saw floating around Twitter. Here he is, Raider Meatloaf.
Yo, Q, it's Raider Meatloaf here. I saw something on Twitter that kind of made me laugh. I just wanted to share it with the draft coming up and everything. This is just pick by pick of some of the picks we've had. They're not the worst picks we've had, but just some of them where the very next player ended up being a superstar. So I'll start off in 2019. Number 4 overall, Cleveland Farrell. Very next pick, Devin White of the Buccaneers. 2016, pick number 44, Jahad Ward. Very next pick, Derrick Henry. 2007, Jamarcus Russell. Very next pick, Calvin Johnson. 2005, we picked Fabian Washington. Very next pick, Aaron Rodgers. 2004, Robert Gallery. Very next pick, Larry Fitzgerald. 2002, Napoleon Harris. The very next pick, Ed Reed. 1997, Adam Treyu. The very next pick, Jason Taylor. So, us, I don't know if we're cursed, if the Raiders are cursed when it comes to the draft, kind of like the Boston Red Sox curse. But, we need to do better. This first year that this coaching regime we'll have an opportunity to inspire Raider Nation that the curse is over. So I don't know who we're going to pick with number 7 overall. In my opinion, Josh Jacobs hasn't signed his franchise tag. We trade back, maybe pick up a couple of later round draft picks for Josh Jacobs if we trade him. And I know you don't think Bijan Robinson is worth that number 7 pick, but again, let's just pick the best player on the board, and we can go from there. I don't see the Raider offense being successful this year with a Zamir White type running back. I think that they need to be a star on the field, and I think Josh Jacobs got some burn left, but if he doesn't want to sign that franchise tag, that's fine. I'm a huge Bijan Robinson fan, and I think he's the best player in the draft. All right. Take care.
Thanks so much for that call, my man. Appreciate you. And, yeah, I saw that graphic floating around Twitter as well. And believe me, I've been down that rabbit hole plenty of times, right? You look at who they drafted and who the next guy was, who they drafted, who the next guy was, who they drafted, who the next guy was. And you could build your own Hall of Fame team, right? But it's not exclusive to just the Raiders. I mean, that's the thing about it. I mean, we get caught up in the fact that we'll go back and look. Some are obvious right away, but some you have to go back and look a few years later and you realize, oh, man, that's a big player that they messed out on. But, you mentioned Jihad Ward and Derrick Henry, and I remember being at that draft. That was in Chicago when the Raiders drafted Jihad Ward, and he was a guy that came from the Illinois area. And I remember being in Chicago, again, the Illinois area. Nobody in that crowd at that theater gave Jihad Ward any props for being drafted, right? That kind of told me all I needed to know. And again, I wasn't like some draft guru where I knew exactly what Jihad Ward was about. But when you're in his own area, his own hometown, basically, and nobody is giving any kind of props to him, it kind of told me all I needed to know. Not to mention, as you mentioned, that beast Derrick Henry was sitting right behind him, who is now, just been killing it for a while there for Tennessee. So, yeah, that was a big miss. Fabian Washington, Aaron Rodgers, I mean, that's a no-brainer. That was one that makes you scratch your head and wonder, what the hell? How did that one happen? But, it's all the time, right? And I think you can go back through the history of most teams and realize that there's going to be a lot of those. But, yeah, the Raiders seem to have quite a bit. And like I said, I've been down that rabbit hole, and sometimes it's almost torture to put yourself through that and actually see what could have been, which obviously isn't. As far as Bijan Robinson, you're right, though. He could very easily be the best player in the draft. I just don't know who's going to pull him first. He's a running back, and unfortunately running backs aren't valued like they should be, and he is next level running back. He's fantastic. I mean, the dude could do just about everything. I was blessed to be able to see him when I was in Central Texas, covering UT, covering Baylor, covering the Big 12, so I got to see him up close and personal. The dude's phenomenal, but at the end of the day, he's a running back. And who's going to pull the trigger on a running back first? It won't be the Raiders at 7. I'll tell you that. They need way more areas on defense filled before they're worried about getting a luxury like Bijan Robinson. But, man, that's a hell of a player. And whoever gets him is going to get a fantastic player. Tampa Bay, my man, Brandon Cristal, who's actually in Denver, KOA in Denver, said he believes Tampa Bay is going to pull the trigger. And if they get him, like my late great-grandmother would say, whoa, Nelly. So watch out for that. That would be a nice little dynamic to have down there in Tampa Bay. Next up, got a text from Raider Eddie. He says, Q, it's Raider Eddie in Denver. Speaking of Denver, there you go. See how I tied that together? Can you talk more about why we didn't bring back Stidham? Seems like he would have been an ideal backup behind Jimmy. Was it about money? I think he's getting about $10 million for 2 years, which doesn't seem prohibitive. Was it because they didn't want to create potential controversy about who's our number 1 quarterback? With Jimmy now, I just don't get it. There have been some moves that just don't give me an idea that there's a real strategic plan sometimes, or am I just too critical? That's my guy, Raider Eddie in Denver. And I'll tell you this. When I saw that, and I think that was the first move that affected the Raiders in free agency in the legal tampering period, I believe, is when that news rolled out about Stidham. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I was shocked. I told everybody who would listen that he's more valuable to the Raiders than any other team in the league. And Denver said, yeah, except for us, bro. Right? Showed what I knew. But they pulled him. I believe that he's going to have an opportunity to show what he's worth, especially if things don't get right with Russell Wilson there. Who knows? But I also learned at the owners' meeting on Monday, actually, to tell you the truth, I learned that there was a pretty good little market for him, which I didn't think was there. So, I mean, that's my fault for not believing that there was a big market for him. But definitely leaves a big hole for the Raiders at the backup quarterback position, especially when you know the starting quarterback is a guy who more times than not needs a backup quarterback. So yeah, that's a great question. I think Denver did a couple things there. They got a good quarterback in Stidham who could end up eventually being something under Sean Payton, and also took away from a division rival. Right? I mean, just took away from the Raiders, and now they have to go address that position. Josh McDaniels didn't seem to like it was a big deal when we talked to him on Monday, but you know, it kind of is what it is. And who's this? Sean Payton said, okay, here's what Sean Payton had to say. And Brandon Cristal here at the owners meeting just passed this along to me. Again, he's in Denver, and that's great timing for your question. What he likes about Jarrett Stidham, I think he's young, but I think he's someone that we had a good grade on coming out. We like the player. I think he played well in the 2 starts he had this year. If you study closely the San Francisco game, he's smart at the line of scrimmage. There were a couple of directions really with that position that were a handful of number 2s that either I have worked with or we felt comfortable with. In this case, I think he's a number 2 whose arrow is moving in a direction where we feel like he could become an NFL starter in our league. The evaluation was pretty crystal clear for all of us. I think he's someone that's going to be great in the room. He's smart quietly. That was an important sign for us. That's from Sean Payton right there. And, man, I'll tell you, I need to do shows and podcasts with Brandon Cristal sitting next to me because he drops the nuggets. He drops the gem. Brandon, thank you so much for that. And, Ray, you probably know him. You're up in Denver, so I'm sure you've heard plenty of Brandon as he's here right across from me at the owners meeting. We're doing some tag team work around here. Got our internet lines hooked up at the same time. We're handling it, man. We're holding it down. So I definitely appreciate him as well. And thank you so much for your text. Next up, got a call from Mark in Kentucky. He's calling to talk about the draft and what the Raiders could do at number 7 with a focus on the offensive line.
Mark in Kentucky. I've been thinking about the draft coming up and what we're going to do there at 7. And I'm not thrilled about taking an O-lineman, but if we do, we have to go Parrish Johnson Jr. over Peter Skoronski. Facts are, Johnson, taller. Johnson, 36-inch arm, 36 and an 1/8-inch arms versus Skoronski, 32 and a quarter. Not to mention, Skoronski will probably have to play guard at the NFL level. He's never played guard in college. Johnson, on the other hand, played all of 2021 at right guard. Who's the Raiders' right guard right now? Nele Mutan, I'm butchering that name. And so if you're going to take an offensive lineman, a tackle, with worst case scenario, that person having to kick inside, why not take the guy who's bigger, longer arms, and played guard before? Not only has he played guard before, he played right guard, where we don't have anyone right now. So if it is offensive lineman, you got to go with offensive tackle, Parrish Johnson Jr., The Ohio State University. Thank you.
Parrish Johnson Jr. would definitely be the guy I would go with as well. Just because Skoronski, I believe, is going to be a guard, as you mentioned. I don't think they address the offensive line at 7, though. I'll tell you that. I think that that's going to be later. There's a couple of guys that I would look at that are just true right tackles. They obviously need a right tackle. They could put a guard. You know, they can address the guard position as well. They do have a couple guys that are versatile and can play some different positions. I don't think offensive line is going to be what they pick with their first pick. I really do truly believe if it's not a quarterback, and they would have to trade up to go get their quarterback. If it's not a quarterback, it's going to be a defensive player. They just got too many holes, right? If there's 11 guys on defense, they got 10 holes on defense. I mean, let's just, keep it a buck, right? I mean, that's just what it is. They need to address all kind of areas of that defensive unit, and give Patrick Graham an opportunity to be successful. So that's where I think that they'll go. But, you never know. You never know when it comes to the draft, and we've been surprised, pleasantly surprised, and somewhat upset at times as well. So thank you so much for that call. I appreciate you. We'll close things out with a text from Black Hole Jr. He said, Raider Nation, what's up? It's Black Hole Jr. out in Antioch. Just wanted to throw this out to the world as I sit here thinking, wondering of what life was and what life could be. Can't wait for what the future holds through thick and thin, through good and bad. As the draft approaches, pondering just a little as I celebrate a new chapter of my life and my family, I wanted to ask a question to you and the nation. What about the Raider Nation culture makes you feed for more for daily life, or feed more of daily life? Typo there. It's all good. Mine is being like the Autumn Wind theme song. Life will knock you around and upside down. I'll laugh when he's conquered and won. What made you a Raiders fan, or why did you continue to be a Raiders fan, and what does being a fan do to help you look forward to the days ahead. So there you go. Black Hole Jr. basically asking about Raider fandom. And I think honestly, to sum it up, it would just be the family type atmosphere that I feel like it used to be. I'll just say that. I feel like it used to be. And I don't know if it's the social media era. I don't know if it's, the Derek Carr era. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't feel like that now. It feels like there's a lot of infighting. I talk about it quite a bit here on the show. And it could be with all the fan bases. I don't know. Brandon, how's Denver? How are the Broncos fans? Are they kumbaya, or is there a lot of infighting? Does Russ have it? Does he not? So it's a little split as well. So see, I mean, it could just be every fan base that team is not as successful as they want them to be could all be fighting. But I think that that's really what it's all about. I mean, I just go back and think about those days at the Coliseum. While the stadium might not have been the sexiest looking stadium and had all the hottest amenities, I know that the Coliseum parking lot was fantastic. And I know I could walk off of BART, walk across the bridge, and just walk into the parking lot and introduce myself. And as long as I got that black jersey on, you got that black jersey on, I'm eating at your spot, you're eating at my spot, whatever the case may be. We're kicking it. I always thought that the family atmosphere thing was what was most impressive about, being a member of Raider Nation. And I used to tell people that weren't fans of certain teams, I would say, hey, just come to a game. Just come to a game and you'll see it, and then you'll enjoy it. And 9 times out of 10, they would. So I think for me, that's what it would be. It's always be about that family atmosphere. And I'm sure that with the Raider Nation, it's pretty much the same. But, we'd love to hear from you. 707-654-4693. Again, 707-654-4693. That's the Locked On Raider Podcast voicemail line. And that's going to do it for today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. Obviously, I'll have plenty of more sound and sights and news and notes from the owners' meetings, and maybe we'll talk to Dave Ziegler and Mark Davis. Hopefully that's going to happen. We're trying to work on that. I'm going to try to push for that, but definitely get some sound from Kyle Shanahan on Jimmy G and whatever else I can work into the magic. But we'll make it happen live from the owners' meeting. So Raider Nation, until tomorrow, definitely appreciate you. Take care of your family. Love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.